The wind in Whistler's Creek carried the smell of rust, whiskey, and old regrets. By sundown, it also carried something new, the sound of 50 silver dollars hitting a foreman's palm. Martha Vale stood straight as a fence post, her black dress dusty to the knees. Her husband had been dead 3 winters now, trampled under a horse that once obeyed her voice better than it ever obeyed his. Since then the ranch had shrunk the way grief does, quiet and steady. The men in town called her barren, cold, witch-bought widow, every name but her own. And that evening, when she counted out her life savings to buy herself a hand, they found a new one for her, Mad. The man she paid for was young, maybe 22. Tommy Pike, they said. No family, no papers, no past worth printing. He'd been caught riding another man's horse. Wasn't his crime that near killed him. It was his silence. Folks don't trust quiet men. When the foreman asked her, "What you want him for, ma'am? Work or warmth?" she didn't flinch. "Both need doing," she said. That night, Tommy stood outside her cabin, rope burns fresh on his wrists. He looked at the house, then at her. "You don't talk much," he said. "I learned talk don't stop bullets or hunger," she replied. The air between them was dry as chalk. He nodded, walked to the barn, and started working without being told. By the next dawn, half the town knew. By noon, they'd begun the whispering, that she'd traded virtue for company, that her dead husband was still warm in the ground, and she was already lighting lamps for another man. But what no one saw, not yet, was the truth that flickered between them like a low fire that refused to die. The widow had not bought a man to serve her. She had bought a witness, someone who might see her without the dirt and rumor. And somewhere behind her calm eyes, a thought was forming, the kind that changes a life without asking permission. If the world's gonna hang me either way, I might as well earn it. By the time spring turned mean, Martha Vale had stopped going to town altogether. The women at the mercantile had learned to talk just loud enough for her to hear. Paid $50 for sin. Talks to crows more than folks. She'll burn same as the witches they used to hang by the river. She'd hear it, keep walking, and let the words trail behind her like dust. It was easier that way. Dust always settles. Words don't. Tommy Pike worked quiet, same as the first day. Sunup to dark, no questions. When she left bread by the barn, he'd nod his thanks without speaking. Sometimes she caught him looking at the cross by the well, her husband's grave marker, leaning now, half swallowed by weeds. Once, he asked softly, "You loved him?" She kept her eyes on the field. "I buried him myself. That's enough." "Love for anyone?" He didn't ask again. The town's meanness ripened with the heat. One morning, Martha woke to find a rope nailed to her gate, a looped noose, coarse hemp, same kind they used for hanging thieves and whores. Tied to it was a scrap of cloth scrawled with words that bled in the rain. "God sees what you do." Tommy found her staring at it, jaw tight. "You want me to take it down?" he asked. She shook her head. "Leave it. Let 'em see I ain't hiding." But that night, after the moon rose, she walked out alone with a lantern. The wind hissed through the fence line, and the noose swung slow, whispering. She took it down, held it for a long time, feeling the fibers bite her palms. Then she threw it into the fire. The smell of burning hemp filled the cabin, sharp and ugly. She stood there till it turned black and curled in on itself, like something that finally ran out of breath. Tommy came to the doorway, hat in hand. "You sure that's wise, ma'am? Folks'll see that smoke." She turned toward him, firelight cutting her face in half. "Let 'em," she said. "They've been watching me burn for years." He didn't speak again, just looked at her a long time, as though he'd seen something fierce and human and broken, and wanted to believe it could still be saved. Outside, the ashes lifted, and somewhere in the dark, a crow called once, soft, almost mourning. The air turned strange the night they came, too quiet, too still, like even the coyotes were holding their breath. A lantern flickered in the distance, then another. By the time Martha noticed the shadows gathering past the ridge, Tommy already had his hand on his rifle. "Don't go out," he said. Her voice stayed calm. "If they're here for me, I'll meet them standing." The first man came on horseback, hat pulled low, whiskey thick on his breath. 3 others followed, faces half hidden in the dark. The leader called out, "Widow Vale, you best come out peaceful." Martha stepped onto the porch, lantern in one hand, the other resting on her hip. The glow caught her face, pale, steady, unflinching. "What's your business?" she asked. One of the men spat. "Our business is decency, and you've been spoiling it." The others laughed, ugly and nervous. "Bought yourself a boy," one said. "Burned a rope meant for justice. You think the Lord don't see?" Tommy stepped into the light, rifle lowered but ready. "He sees," he said quietly, "and he don't much like what he's seeing." That stopped them for a moment, not because they feared him, but because he sounded like someone who'd already buried worse. The leader sneered. "You talk big for a bought man." Tommy's eyes didn't waver. "Ain't bought no more." They started forward then, slow and sure. One threw a torch at the barn. Dry hay caught quick. The flame rose like a scream, red and cruel. Another man raised his gun. Martha didn't move. "You light my home," she said, "and I'll haunt your grandchildren." The men laughed, and that's when Tommy fired. One shot, clean. The laughter cut off. He moved without thinking, reloading as the others scattered behind the smoke. 2 more shots cracked through the night. When the noise fell away, the fire was all that spoke. Martha stood there, watching her barn collapse into itself, the light painting her face in gold and ash. Tommy came to her side, chest heaving. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "Only tired." He looked toward the flames. "They'll come back with more." She nodded. "Then we'll greet 'em with less mercy." She walked to the edge of the yard, where the rope had burned days before, and pressed her hand to the soil, still warm. "They call me witch," she whispered, "but all I ever did was refuse to die quiet." The fire crackled, and for a moment even the night seemed to listen. Dawn came pale and bitter. The barn was nothing but ribs of black timber, smoke coiling upward like a curse. Martha Vale sat on the porch steps, bare feet in the ash, coffee untouched beside her. She didn't cry. She'd spent those tears years ago, on a grave and a God that never answered. Tommy Pike stood near the fence, coat burned at the sleeve, eyes raw from smoke. He'd buried 2 men by sunrise, far from the creek, the ones who'd stayed too long last night. He didn't speak of it, and she didn't ask. When the wind shifted, they both smelled horses. Riders, coming slow, deliberate. Tommy checked the rifle, jaw tight. Martha rose, smoothed her skirt, and faced the road like someone expecting a sermon. 6 riders appeared through the haze, the sheriff at the front, hat low, mouth set hard. Sheriff Amos Crane, lawman of Whistler's Creek. Behind him rode 2 deputies, 3 townsmen holding rifles, as if that could steady their fear. Crane stopped at the gate. "Widow Vale," he called, "I reckon you know why we're here." Martha didn't blink. "If it's to offer condolences, you're late." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the burned barn. "You killed 3 men." "They tried to kill me." "Maybe so, but justice don't take kindly to folks taking it for themselves." Tommy stepped forward. "They weren't justice. They were drunk on hate." Crane turned his gaze on him, cold and slow. "Boy, you still under auction law. That woman bought you, not freed you." Martha's voice cut through the still air. "He's freer than any man here." The deputies shifted in their saddles. The sheriff dismounted. He pulled something from his saddlebag, a rope, clean and new, looped perfect like a threat that never aged. He dropped it in the dust between them. "Town wants peace," he said. "Sometimes peace needs a hanging." Martha looked at the rope, then at him. Her face didn't change. "I buried 1 man for this land. I'll bury another if I must." Crane's jaw flexed. "You talking about me?" She met his eyes. "I'm talking about sin that wears a badge." Tommy's hand tensed on the rifle, but she raised hers, a small, calm motion. Then she bent, picked up the rope, and tossed it into the smoldering pit beside her. The hemp caught, hissed, black smoke curling upward like a dark prayer. When she spoke, it was soft, but the words carried clear. "Your rope's done its work, Sheriff. Time it hung itself." No one moved. Even the horses stayed still. And for the first time, Amos Crane didn't know which of them the town truly feared. The rain came that night without thunder, just a whispering kind, slow, steady, patient. It washed over the blackened barn and the ash pit where the sheriff's rope had burned. Martha Vale stood in the doorway, shawl pulled tight, watching the drops cut tiny rivers through the dust. Tommy Pike sat by the hearth, cleaning his rifle again, though it was already clean. "You think that was the end of it?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Men like Crane don't end easy. They wait for a crowd to do their courage. He nodded once. "Then we best keep the horses ready." She turned her gaze toward the rain. "No, if we run now, it means they were right about me." Outside, the wind carried the sound of a bell, distant, faint from town. Tommy's shoulders stiffened. "They're calling a meetin'." Martha didn't flinch. "Then they've made up their mind." By morning, the creek trail was mud. They saw the first riders by noon, 10, maybe 12. Men with lanterns and shotguns, women wrapped in shawls, even boys from the feed store. The kind of crowd that forms when fear decides to wear righteousness. At their front rode Sheriff Crane again, coat slick with rain, rope coiled clean and dry under his saddle. Beside him, the preacher, Reverend Cole, face red with conviction. They stopped at the fence line. "Widow Vale," the preacher called, "we're here to cleanse what's left of your wickedness." Martha stepped forward, bareheaded, eyes bright in the gray light. "You aim to do God's work, Reverend, or your own?" His voice quivered. "You mock the Lord. You burned the sign of justice." She lifted her chin. "I burned a lie." Tommy moved beside her, rifle across his chest. Crane raised a hand. "Boy, you best move aside before we lay you next to her." Tommy said nothing, only stepped closer to her. And in that small motion, something in the crowd wavered. Then, from behind the men, a little girl's voice broke through the rain. "She ain't no witch." All heads turned. It was Eliza May, the blacksmith's daughter, soaked through, clutching a rag doll. "She prayed for my ma when she was dying," the child cried. "She gave us bread when the church wouldn't." The reverend went pale. "Child, hush your mouth!" Eliza's father laid a hand on her shoulder but didn't pull her back. And when Martha met his eyes, he looked down, ashamed. The silence that followed was long, brittle. Then Martha spoke softly. If a child's voice can see clearer than grown men, maybe God's already chosen his side. No one answered. The rope stayed on Crane's saddle, untouched. Rain hissed on the ashes, washing them into the earth. Tommy exhaled slow. "You think they're done?" She watched the crowd turn away, one face at a time. "No," she whispered, "but they're starting to think." The next morning smelled of rain and smoke, like the world had been scrubbed raw, but not made clean. Martha Vale sat at her kitchen table, rolling a piece of charred rope between her fingers. It was what little remained from the sheriff's threat. Outside, Tommy Pike saddled the horses, every motion tight and careful. "You sure?" he asked when she stepped out. Her eyes were distant. "I ain't leavin' because I'm scared, Tommy. I'm leavin' because I'm done begging the world to believe me." He nodded, jaw working. "Then I ride with you. You don't owe me that." "Maybe not. But I ain't lettin' 'em hang the only soul ever treated me like one." They rode south at dusk. The creek trail was still half mud from the storm, the hills slick and quiet. Neither spoke much. Martha's shawl flapped behind her like a flag that had survived too many battles. When night came, they made camp near the old river crossing, a dark current swollen from the rain. Martha sat by the fire, rubbing her hands near the flame. "You ever wonder what freedom costs?" Tommy poked the embers. "Every man I knew paid different. Some with blood, some with silence." She looked up at him. "And women?" He thought about that, eyes soft. "Seems to me they pay with everything they ain't allowed to keep." Before dawn, they reached the river. It was running high, muddy, and mean, the color of rusted iron. Martha stared at it a long time. "That's the last line they can draw on me," she whispered. Tommy dismounted, took her reins. "Then let's cross it before it decides otherwise." Halfway through, the current caught them. Her mare stumbled, slipped sideways into the flood. Tommy lunged, caught her arm. Cold water swallowed her scream. He pulled hard, muscles straining till they both crashed against the far bank, soaked, gasping. When she finally caught breath, she started laughing, a sound half wild, half free. Tommy wiped mud from her face. "You all right?" She nodded, eyes bright through the river water. "I ain't drowned yet. That's something." They built a small fire under a cottonwood tree. Martha pulled the half-melted branding, iron from her saddlebag, the old Vale mark. Tommy watched her feed it to the flames till the metal glowed red. Then she drove it deep into the wet earth. "Not his mark anymore," she said. Tommy looked at her and smiled slow. "No, ma'am. Now it's yours." The river hissed behind them, and for the first time in a long while, the night didn't feel like it was waiting to take something from her. By the time they reached Elm's Crossing, the world had gone quiet again. It wasn't a town so much as a cluster of shacks along the river bend, a few lanterns, a saloon, and a chapel leaning with age. Martha's hands were blistered from the ride. Her skirt clung damp to her legs. Tommy's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. They found shelter in the chapel, old wood, open door, the smell of wax and wet dust. A sign over the altar read, "Mercy for all who repent." Martha muttered, "Mercy don't come cheap." An old preacher shuffled out from the shadows. Reverend Josiah Ward, white hair tangled, voice like dry paper. When he saw her, recognition crossed his face, sharp and heavy. "Widow Vale," he said, "you bring your curse with you?" She didn't bow. "Just my shadow." Ward's gaze slid to Tommy. "And who's the boy?" Tommy wiped his hands. "A man who owes her his life." "Then you're already in debt deeper than you know." Still, the preacher let them stay, in exchange for silence, for labor, and for prayers neither of them believed in. For 2 days, the rain held them there. Tommy fixed the roof. Martha swept the chapel floor until her hands trembled. They spoke little. The quiet between them was something sacred and heavy, not peace, but a truce with what hurt. On the 3rd night, Ward came to her. He stood in the doorway, lantern in hand. "You burned a rope," they say. "I did." "You think fire changes sin?" She looked up from her cot. "It changes everything it touches." He sighed. "You brought trouble here, Martha. The law's been through already askin'." Her eyes narrowed. "And what did you tell 'em?" "I told 'em God would send you back to face what you started." The words landed like cold iron. Tommy appeared in the doorway behind him, rifle low. "Preacher," he said, voice low and hard, "you best think on whose blood you're trading for your salvation." Ward's lantern shook, light dancing across the wall. "The law's comin' by dawn," he whispered. "You can run or hang." Then he turned and walked away, mumbling scripture that sounded more like guilt than faith. Outside, the rain started again, soft, steady, endless. Martha gathered her things without a word. Tommy caught her arm. "Say it. You think he sold us out?" She looked toward the river, face carved in resolve. "Men like him don't sell," she said quietly. "They surrender." And, before dawn's first light, they rode once more, toward the water, toward the unknown, with thunder rolling behind them like a debt come due. They rode hard through the night. The rain turned to mist, the mist to cold, and the cold to silence. That strange, waiting kind of silence the plains make after too much blood has been spilled on them. The river behind them murmured like a secret being buried. By dawn, they'd left the preacher's land behind. The horses were near spent, their breath steaming in the gray light. Martha Vale finally pulled up near a bluff overlooking the flats. Below, the land stretched wide and empty, painted in bruised morning colors, purples and pale golds. "This far enough," she said softly. Tommy reined beside her. "Ain't no town for miles. That's why it's far enough." They dismounted, too tired to speak. Martha knelt by a patch of damp earth and started digging with her hands. Tommy watched, puzzled, until he saw what she pulled from her satchel, the wooden doll that little Eliza May had pressed into her hands. The doll's face was smudged, one eye gone, dress torn from the rain. Martha brushed the dirt from its cheek and smiled faintly. "She said she'd name it Martha," she murmured. "I figure it's time to give this Martha a place to rest." She laid it in the small hollow, pressed the soil over it gentle, and whispered, "Let what they buried of me stay here, and let what's left walk free." Tommy crouched beside her. "You really think we'll ever stop running?" She looked toward the horizon, that endless golden edge where the sky met promise and peril. "Maybe not, but every mile we make without their rope around our necks, That's freedom enough for today." He studied her face, the lines, the scars, the quiet that wasn't weakness, but hard-won grace. "You ever think about going back?" She shook her head. "Can't go back to a world that only knows how to punish a woman for living." They built a small fire, just enough to dry their clothes. Tommy took out his knife, carved something into a flat stone nearby, then set it upright beside the little grave. When Martha leaned close, she saw the words, carved slow and uneven. Not a witch, not a sin, just a woman. She reached out, laid her hand over his. "You write better than you talk, boy." He smiled, eyes wet. "Ain't words that matter. It's who remembers." That night the wind rose again, gentle this time. It carried the smell of wet sage and the faint sound of coyotes crying somewhere far off, not mourning, but answering each other. Martha Vale sat beside the dying fire, shawl drawn close, her hand resting on the stone. The firelight flickered over the scar on her palm, where rope had burned and never quite healed. And in that glow, it didn't look like shame anymore. It looked like proof. The next morning, they rode west, slow, steady, side by side. No one saw them go. But years later, when travelers passed that bluff, they spoke of a little grave marked by a single word, carved deep into stone. Free. And that was how the folk of Whistler's Creek came to whisper another story. Not about a witch, or a widow, or a bought man, but about how the land sometimes remembers the truth longer than the people ever could. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe my channel.